we continue this rolling coverage of what is happening in the Middle East at various locations. This afternoon, the world is watching, and we understand that Israeli media is already reporting that Israeli hostages have been released. Now, this is the first tranche, the first batch of hostages to be released over a 4-day period, and according to a temporary truce, and let's be clear, it is a temporary truce agreed to by both sides. There will be 4 days of no fighting. We've seen weeks and weeks of bloody fighting until now. There will be 4 days, and over time, the hostages being held by Hamas that were taken on the 7th of October from Israel in that gruesome attack, they will be released in total 150, starting with 13 today. In fact, let me correct myself, 50 Israeli hostages will be released, starting with 13 today. So we were waiting, looking at the visuals. That release was expected to take place at the Rafah border crossing with Egypt. So we'll bring you some visuals from there. These are other visuals right now where the hostages are due to be taken. This is an Israeli base, and it's understood that they will be transported to this Israeli base. So that will be the first 13. And the focus here is on women and children. So we expect a young child to be among this first cohort of Israeli hostages to be released by Hamas. And then, as part of the agreement, over the next 2 hours, Israel will be releasing Palestinian prisoners being held in prisons in Israel, and we are expecting 39 of those people to be released today. So that will be on day one. Over time, 50 Israeli hostages will be released, and 150 female and young Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli prisons will be released. So let's just clarify, what you're seeing here again is the base in Israel where the hostages are expected to be received. That's the Hatzarim base, and they will arrive here imminently if those reports are correct, that they have been released. We understand that the hostages will be released to the Red Cross and a delegation from Egypt that was talking earlier. So this is what both sides have agreed, that they are the trusted parties. The Red Cross and Egypt will receive the hostages, and then they will be brought to this Hatzarim base in Israel. And this is a truce for which Qatar is being recognized as one of the main negotiators, bringing the two sides to the table, saying, let's at least do this swap. That's what it is, a swap of hostages for prisoners, and then let's also get aid in. So at the Rafah border crossing between Egypt and Gaza earlier, we saw a lot of those aid trucks going in today. Let's bring you some analysis now. We're joined by RiskRecon's director, Dr. Kingsley Makhubela. Doctor, thank you for being with us. A pivotal moment right now. It does seem that the truce is holding, that this is happening.
Good afternoon, Francis. It's not a truce, actually. It's called a pause, which has created a lot of problem within the Security Council. You recall sometimes a few days ago, I think early this week, the Security Council came up with a resolution, a very compromised resolution that included everyone's support. And the argument has been around whether are you going to have a ceasefire, and eventually they settled and agreed on the term pause. And the term pause has serious ramifications for a lot of members of the Security Council, because it means any of the parties to the conflict can at any time go back to the conflict. But having said that, Francis, the negotiation of this release was conducted and really helpful by intelligence officers. You will know that William Burns and David Barnier, and lately Abbas Kamel, the head of the Egyptian intelligence, got involved when the identity of the hostages was a sticking point. And there was an agreement that was reached in terms of how they're going to be released. I think there are more negotiations that are taking place in terms of the further release of other hostages, how it's going to be managed and so on. But this is one big move in terms of the release of the hostages. And Qatar has played a pivotal role. And the Qataris, they hope that the momentum will be maintained after this release to really carry on with moving forward from a pause to a ceasefire of some sort.
All right, so we're going to bring up some visuals now, Doctor, of the Offa prison, and that is in Israel, and that is where we are expecting the Israeli prisoners to be released by Israel. So that will be 39 prisoners that will come out after, and we're expecting within a 2-hour time frame after the 13 Israeli prisoners are released by Hamas. Like you say, this isn't any sort of an end, any sort of a full stop here, and both sides are adamant that the war will continue. But, Doctor, we heard members of the EU, that delegation speaking to the press earlier, saying that they really hope this could lead to something permanent. Would that be possible?
Well, there's a lot of pressure around the world, particularly in the United States and most European countries. This pressure comes from the public, the outrage that people have seen in terms of women and children that are being killed in Gaza. And with the United States going to the elections, the Americans are quite careful that these images that have dominated the public discourse around the world will be managed by finding some form of a solution. And we hope that the Americans would use their influence to secure some form of a permanent ceasefire and allow the negotiation process to carry on in terms of issues or underlying issues to the conflict. So that's the hope that everyone has. You would see, you would have realized that the Europeans are quite divided, particularly within the EU. There's a lot of divisions. Some countries have really stopped supporting Israel. They've raised serious concern. I mean, there are people who have been relieved from their cabinet portfolio in Spain for really taking hardline position against Israel. But that tells you the magnitude of the problem. And hopefully this public pressure has played a very important role in terms of allowing this moment that we are having, this pause moment, and building on the pause moment to secure some form of a ceasefire.
All right, so it's being reported on widely as a temporary truce. Dr. Kingsley Makhubela saying the exact term used by the UN here is a pause, which really highlights that what has been agreed to here will only last for 4 days, possibly more, but there are hopes for more. International editor Sophie Makhubela joining us now, and stay with us, Doctor, as well. But Sophie, Qatar getting the credit for bringing the two sides to this point, but the US has been involved. There have been lots of talks. We heard the Egyptians earlier. We heard members of the EU. Tell us what you know about who was involved and how this pause or temporary truce came about.
Well, I think it's public knowledge that Qatar did play an important role. You also have countries such as Egypt, because as you are aware, the Rafah border is part of the strategy in terms of moving the humanitarian assistance to Gaza, but also in terms of the release of the hostages. You have countries such as the United States of America, the friends of Israel, and therefore the US was going to be involved. You also have other countries, you may not know, smaller countries that are able also to speak to other parties, because there's this misnomer that because Hamas is being declared as a terrorist organization by Israel and the friends of Israel, you have to ignore Hamas. And only people who Hamas can trust are able to speak to Hamas. And therefore it is a hard work, as we had earlier on. It is not an easy task, this one, when you negotiate, and I think the ambassador is fully aware, he has been involved in such challenges when South Africa was engaged in assisting countries to achieve peace. And therefore, there are many, many role players.
All right, and then of course the talks have to be handled very sensitively, don't they, Sophie? And you, in fact, spoke to a crisis negotiator, Makhubela. Let's take a listen to that. All right, while we wait for that, let's just remind you of what we're looking at on the screen. We're bringing to you various sites, various places where media has been set up. One, earlier we showed you the Offer prison, where we are expecting prisoners, Palestinian prisoners, mostly women and teenage prisoners, to be released by Israel. And then that's what you're seeing on your screen right now. You can notice not a huge media contingent. This is a highly guarded Israeli prison. We were also showing you earlier the Hatzerim base, where the released hostages are expected to arrive. Those are the hostages released by Hamas. And we are hearing that Israeli media is reporting that the hostages have been transferred to the Egyptians, so they would be the receiving authority. I'm joined by Dr. Kingsley Makhubela and international editor Sophie Makhubela. Let's see if we can listen in on that discussion she had earlier with negotiator Makhubela about what could have happened behind the scenes here.
A significant number of trucks with diesel and food were entered into Gaza in order to allow a bit more supply for the humanitarian, for the people in Gaza. We expect within the next 2 to 3 hours, a group of 13 kids and the mothers to be handed over to the Red Cross in the southern part of Gaza, and then they will be handed over to the Israeli military at the Palestinian-Egyptian crossing point with the help and the facilitation of Egypt.
What can happen if there's a violation of this agreement?
Well, this is a very accurate and sensitive question. The deal is constructed in 3 phases. Hamas was committed to release 50 hostages in 3 rounds. During this 4 days of ceasefire and the implementation of this exchange, many things violent could erupt, many violent actions could be erupted, either attacks on Israeli forces, either loss of hostages, the sensitivity of all the issues, the tensions on the ground, the aggression and the violation of the peace during this period is expected. Of course, we hope that the joint interest of Israel to get the hostages and of Hamas to have this ceasefire for their own internal organization of the forces, we hope that the interest to comply, to implement the deal as planned, will be stronger than the interest to take advantage of some, I would say, tactical opportunity on the ground to hit one another.
Is truce holding finally?
Well, this is not truce. I think that we should not see it as a ceasefire or as a truce. Israel insists of consider it is a humanitarian pause for a humanitarian deal. The question that everybody is interested is to what extent this could be expanded to a general ceasefire, which will stop the war in Gaza. And from our perspective, and now I'm speaking not only as a hostage negotiator, but as an Israeli citizen, from the Israel's perspective, this war will not over until Hamas military and governing capabilities, this terror regime, will be eradicated as a governing power in Gaza, and no more threat will be there will be no more threat from Gaza to Israeli communities. How the future of Gaza will look like? Well, that depends on the international community. That depends on the Palestinian people themselves, to the extent they can emerge a peaceful leadership who will be able to be integrated.
Some may say Benjamin Netanyahu is not interested in peace. Some people are saying he is a warlord.
Benjamin Netanyahu, with all the criticism that he faces international and also in Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu supported a policy of providing funds through Qatar to Hamas to allow Palestinian workers from Gaza to work in Israel. And we were confronted with probably the most massive attack against Jews since the Holocaust in the state of Israel. For Israel, it was a significant pain, and it was a wake-up call to understand in which neighborhood we live. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a very volatile conflict, very violent. In my early career, I was part of the Israeli government negotiation team with the Palestinians for almost a decade. All these attempts faced with Palestinian refusal in the year 2000, in the year 2008, and now in 2023 with this massive attack. Peace in the Middle East could come only when the Palestinian people and the Arabs around us will accept Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state in the land of Israel, where the borders will be negotiable. What will be the relation between the future peaceful state of Palestine and the future and the state of Israel? That's negotiable. But the core of the conflict, the acceptance of Palestinians and Arabs, the acceptance of Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state, this will never be compromised.
Sophie's chat earlier, and let's bring up these visuals. What you're seeing now is the Rafah border crossing between Egypt and the Gaza Strip. This has been the focus of the day. Earlier, we understand from Israeli media and from Hamas itself confirming that the captives have been handed over to the Red Cross and Egypt. These are the hostages that were being held by Hamas. We couldn't see them on screen, but behind our what we can see, we understood that the Red Cross and Egyptian authorities were standing by to receive those hostages. They are then going to be transported to an Israeli base, and there Israel will receive the hostages. But what you have seen is some movement of trucks, and that's part of this pause, to use the correct term that the sides have agreed on and that has been discussed at the UN. This pause also allows a lot of humanitarian aid through, and a few more of those trucks, and we've seen that happening throughout the day. Let's bring back international editor Sophie Makhubela. And Sophie, your guest earlier talking about what's at stake if one shot is fired, if one side decides to fire a rocket or a missile. And we've seen before truces barely holding in the past, in 2014, for example. So is this the good news that this pause seems to be holding on day one? We are on day one of 4 days.
Yes, indeed. It is good to see that at least the main purpose of this pause, the results thereof have been achieved. One, the trucks that moved in early in the morning when it came into place, and now this exchange. But earlier on, our correspondent in Tel Aviv spoke about 2 people who were killed in the north of Gaza. You know that people were told to move out of the north and go to the south. And these people, apparently, they were going back to the north to go and see what's left and perhaps to trace their relatives. Unfortunately, they were killed. And therefore, we can't say completely there were no incidents. This is the only incident we know about, but we don't know what's going to happen tonight. But secondly, the breaking news at 5 was that in relation to the hostages, it is not only those that are of interest to Israel, but there were citizens of Thailand who were working in that area when they were abducted, who were released, 19 of them. And it was not expected. And therefore you can see that there's also some attempts to show some interest in ensuring that you find a way to resolve this, because nobody anticipated that Hamas, when it has agreed on this number, it will add 19 people. And these were people from Thailand who were working in the region, and the leader of Thailand, leader of government, making an announcement an hour ago.
So those are Thai hostages being released, Thai nationals being released, alongside the 13 Israeli hostages that were being held by Hamas. So we heard Israeli media quoting government officials saying that those 13 had now been released. Al Jazeera is also reporting from Hamas sources, with Hamas telling Al Jazeera that they have handed over the captives to the Red Cross and they will return via Egypt. So we're getting an idea of how this is playing out. The Red Cross is the trusted authority on the side of Gaza. They receive the hostages from Hamas. They are then handed over to Egyptian authorities, and then we showed you that Israeli base where they are expected to be delivered to. Thereafter, we are expecting the release of Palestinian prisoners being held in Israeli jails. 39 today, women, and we understand mostly teen Palestinian prisoners will be among that first cohort. Hamas saying that this is the first group under the agreement, and the prisoners were handed over to the Red Cross, who will take them to the Egyptians about half an hour ago.